Vocaloid.
Hey everyone, this is Stephen Munn here, and today I want to talk about how to construct a song from scratch using Vocaloid and some cheap, free software. Now, I know a lot of you don't have a lot of funds because most Vocaloid fans are young. And so you might not have a job or a job that pays a lot. And there is an urge to, download a free copy of it. I strongly recommend you don't do that. If companies don't sell their software, then they can't make any money. I know it's hard because I was in that position before. When I was younger, I remember Flash was the big thing and everybody wanted to mess around with Flash, but the Flash software was extremely expensive. Vocaloids, they're not that, it's $100 for the voice bank and $100 for the editor. Put together $200, that's a big chunk of change. But what I recommend you do is at least buy the Vocaloid voice bank. Just buy one voice bank, knock your back $100. And what you can do is you can use the Tiny Editor, and you can use free multi-track software from Presonus called Studio One Prime. And that's a fully functional free software. It's limited in some respects, but what do you expect? It's free. But it's very powerful. So with those two software, the Tiny Editor and and Studio One Prime, you can make an entire Vocaloid song. So I want to go through how to do that. Okay, let's start. Well, first of all, you got to write a song. And what I normally do, this is my process, I will usually use a guitar and just start banging around chords back and forth. And when I'm doing that, I'm trying to come up with a melody in my head, and I just need an idea. You don't have to have the melody completely fleshed out, but you just have to have some kind of idea. And once I do that, and let me pull up the chord sheet here, I'll start writing down the chords that I'm thinking of, and I'll start putting together lyrics. Now, for this example, I just used lyrics from a poem, public domain, mind you. You don't want to violate anybody's copyright. I took a poem from one of Christina Rossetti's poem called A Dirge, and I put that to my melody and chords here. And it's a very short song. It's only about a minute and a half. And the reason why sometimes I do that to use an existing poem is because as I get older, it's much harder for me to come up with my own lyrics. I was never a prolific writer in the first place when I was younger, but I find that as I've gotten older, it gets harder and harder, and it makes me think that when you get older, maybe all your creative juices just kind of dry up. But anyway, so I've got this song, and I always write it down and print it out, so I have something to look at. So once that's done, you can move on to the next step and actually lay down your backing tracks. And we're going to be using the Presonus Studio One Prime software for that. It's a multi-track software, and it actually has everything you need to do to make a song in that. So let's go to that next step. All right, let's go ahead and open up Studio One Prime. And I've already actually got the song completed here, so I'm just going to open that up. Okay, so now you see the Studio One Prime interface. I think this is probably the best option for you guys who are starting out and never used a multi-track recording software before. I think it's better than the other free options, or even some of the other lower cost options out there. One, they do give you 9 effects. Basic reverb, delay, compression, things like that. For the beginner, that's all you need. You're not going to need all these fancy effects when you're just starting to learn how to mix stuff. This software also is very easily laid out. The workflow is logical and intuitive. So I think learning how to use this is easier than other software. You have your mixer right there. All the controls are laid out. You don't have to drill down multiple options and menus. It's very accessible right in one screen. They also give you a virtual instrument, the Presonus Presence Editor. Again, you don't need to have a million different virtual instruments. The Presonus Presence Editor has all the sounds you need for a beginner. Your drums, your guitars, your orchestral sounds. It also gives you loops. Wave loops if you don't want to do MIDI drums. And you could just snip those wave sections, piece them together how you want, and use those. Same applies to any other of the wave sounds that they give you. So it's really a full-featured set that you get with this free software. And once you learn it, you might decide that, hey, I want to buy the Studio One Artist version. That's $99, which is very reasonable. But if you don't want to pay that, you can keep on using this Studio One Prime. It does a lot. Okay, so let's go back to the song. Now, as you can see, I've set up markers here because you want to mark off every section. You have the intro, the verse, the chorus, and second verse and second chorus. Because what you want to do is you need to export each section by itself instead of exporting the whole song. Now, because I have the full Vocaloid editor, that's what I normally do, because I just import the whole song into the Vocaloid editor. With the Tiny editor, you only have 17 bars. So, what do you need to construct a song? First, I always like to do basic tracks. You go with the drums. You go with some kind of instrument track, like the guitar, which I usually do, or piano. And also, I like to lay down scratch vocals. The reason why I like to lay down scratch vocals is because I need a vocal guide in Vocaloid. So I can match up the note, whether it's a D or C or F or whatever, and also the timing, when I began the note, when I ended the note. It's just helpful rather than going in blind. You don't need bass. You don't need percussion. You just need those 3 tracks just to start off with to export out to the Vocaloid. So when we get ready to export it, we want to export out each section only. And Studio One Prime makes it very easy to export the mix down. If I wanted to export the whole song, I would just choose between song start and song end marker. That's the whole song. But again, we can't do that because it won't be any use in the Tiny Vocaloid Editor. So we have to do it per section between markers. And so you can see from this drop-down menu, I can select each section. So I would export the verse, the chorus, the verse, second verse, and then the second chorus. So that's 4 sections. I would do that each time to export out that piece. So let's give this track a listen.
Why were you born when the snow was falling? You should have come to cuckoo's calling.
Yeah, see, my vocals are pretty bad, right? Well, let me tell you something. when I was a kid in elementary school, I was in the chorus, right? And I thought, well, that means I can sing because I'm in the school chorus. I didn't realize until later on that they put every kid in the school chorus. That doesn't mean you can sing. And as I've gotten older, my voice has gotten worse because my range is worse, and I'm just not a very good singer. But that's okay. I don't care because I just need to lay down some kind of vocal scratch track just to listen to, so I know where to put the notes, or make it easier to find where to put the notes in the Vocaloid Editor. So let's go to the Tiny Vocaloid Editor now, and you can see now that we've exported out these sections, how we bring that in. Okay, so now that we've exported out all our different sections from Studio One Prime, your verse and chorus parts, we can now import them one at a time into the Tiny Vocaloid Editor. So I'm going to start up the Tiny Vocaloid Editor here. Okay. And a couple of things I want to go over about the Tiny Vocaloid Editor. It's the free editor, as many of you already know, that comes with any of the Vocaloid voice banks that you buy. It is extremely limited, but you can work around those limitations if you don't want to shell out another $100 for the actual editor. The limits on the measures of the song is 17, but that's okay because for the most part, for songs, you generally won't go beyond 16 bars in a song for each section. So you have 16 bars for the verse, for the chorus. A lot of times I actually have less, but for example, in that sample song that I'm doing right now that you saw, I only use 8 bars for each part. But generally it's just 16 bars. So you can do an entire part in a Tiny Vocaloid Editor. You just have to do it multiple times because you can't fit the whole song in there. Other limitation, you can only have one track. So if you were going to do the harmony, you'd have to do that separately too. It's kind of a pain, but again, it's a limitation that you can work around with if you don't want to pay, to buy the actual full editor. All the other things, the parts of the Tiny Vocaloid Editor, how you draw it out, all your control parameters here, it's the same. Those are the same, so that's not affected. The other thing, though, is that you only have one effect, and that's reverb. And I actually like to turn it off. I don't like to use any of the effects in the Vocaloid Editor, even in the full editor where you can bring in your own VSTs. I never do any effects work in Vocaloid. I use the multitrack software because I find that much better at handling that kind of stuff, because you would use that for mixing, and that's where the effects come in. So let me open up the track, or one of the sections, and I'm only going to show you the one section rather than all the 2 different courses in the last verse, because it's the same process. So here you see that I've already completed the verse 1 section. One thing you need to be sure, though, before you import that wave section from Studio One, is make sure your tempo is the same. Now, if you didn't change it to Studio One, then you don't have to worry about it, because all software generally defaults to 120 beats per minute. Obviously, if you did a slow song, if you're doing a slow song that's only 90 beats per minute and you change it to 90 in one software, you got to make sure it matches. And in Vocaloid, it's right up here. You just double click on that and you can change it. But because it's 120, I don't care. It matches. Now, the reason why I like to put in a vocal scratch track in the Studio One Prime is because when we import it into the Tiny Vocaloid Editor, I now have a guide to lay down the Vocaloid notes. It helps me match up the actual note value, C, D, E, or whatever, but it also helps me match up the placement when I start singing, when I stop singing. It makes it easier rather than to go in blind and putting in the notes without any kind of backing vocals to help guide you. So, and you can hear that, you're going to hear both vocals in here when I play it back.
Why were you born when the snow was falling? You should have come to the cuckoo's calling. More when breaks are green.
So you could hear that it pretty much matches up with my vocals. So once you've done putting down all the notes here, and you're ready to export it, you just go to File, Export, Wave. Select Current Track. Don't select the master track because you don't want to mix this down. You don't want to include the sound of the backing track. You just want the Vocaloid vocals. So you would do that each time for the verse 1, the first chorus, second verse, and the second chorus. So you have 4 sections. And if you wanted to do harmony, you would have to do a separate section for that too, because the Tiny Vocaloid Editor can only handle 1 track. But that's not bad. It's a limitation. I think it's fair to get a free editor. So now let's go back to Studio One Prime. Okay, now let's go back to our Studio One Prime software. And I'm going to go ahead and open up that song again. Okay, now that we have our Vocaloid tracks all exported, we want to import them back in and piece them together into a single Vocaloid, single vocal track. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and create a new track and show you how that's done here. So we go to Add Tracks, and we want to add a stereo track because the Vocaloids are in stereo. So now we got the new track, and I'm going to go ahead and rename this from track 9 to New Vocals. Okay, so the first track we want to import is verse 1. And by the way, you can go to the markers directly by just using your keyboard. For instance, the verse 1, you could just hit the 3 and hit 4 goes the chorus. But that makes it a lot easier, quicker anyway, instead of using your mouse. So let's go to the song up on the menu. And we can import a file. And I've already got all my files here, as you can see. So we're going to start with verse 1. And you can see it pulls it in, and also you see that there's a lot of silence in the beginning and at the end. That's because Vocaloid dumps out the entire 17 bars. So we're going to need to trim that. You just grab the edge and pull it, and then we slide that whole section over so that it matches up. You can see where the vocals start lining up with the verse 1 marker. And let's go to the end and move that back so we have a clean space to import the chorus. So we position our marker at the chorus, and then we import the chorus 1. And again, we do the same thing. Let's trim that empty space, empty sound, and slide that over. Go to the end. Bring that back there. And let's just do that now for verse 2. Again, we trim the silent sections so we can move it so that it starts appropriately. And trim the end. And now we are at the last chorus section. Import chorus 2. And I just need to be able to grab that edge correctly. Slide that in. And I need to be able to go to the end and grab that edge. Actually, I mean, I don't really need to do that because there's nothing after that. And there you have it. You just created one complete vocal part by importing the 4 different sections that you export out of the Tiny Vocaloid Editor. Pretty simple. Not as easy as if you had the full editor and you could just import and export the whole song, but it's not that big of a deal to do multiple sections. So let me go ahead and get rid of this. We don't need it since I already have the original Vocaloid track that I did before.
Okay, so let's give the completed track a listen. Okay, so there you have it, a complete song using Vocaloid and Studio One Prime software. You've got your drums, you've got your guitar, you got your bass, and you got your Vocaloid vocals. That's it. That's all you need for a basic song. Pretty simple, right? What I always like to do to start is first write your song, get everything down on paper so you know where all the parts are. Then go into Studio One Prime and create your drum track first. And I like to use loops. Put in your markers. Make sure you note where the verse starts and where the chorus starts, because you're going to need to be able to export each part separately to go into the Tiny Vocaloid Editor. Once you're in Tiny Vocaloid Editor, put in your melody notes, export that back out, and then once you have all those parts done, you can go back to Studio One Prime and import the vocal parts into the vocal track. And you have to do it for each separate one since you can't export the whole song in the Tiny Vocaloid Editor. But that's not a problem. You just do it step by step. 4 or 5 times. And then you can stitch those vocal parts together. And then you're done. Now, going back to the drum part, as I mentioned, I always use drum loops. I like how they sound. And I've bought several collections of drum loops. You may not have drum loops, but you can still use drum loops because they have some in the Studio One Prime software. If we click on the loop tab, we see that there are a bunch of drum loops already there. And you could just audition them to find out the drum loop that you think would be good for your song. So let's go ahead and take a listen to one of the loops. Let's say you like that one. Well, how do you get it into the track? You just drag and drop the loop right in. Pretty easy. Now to copy the loop, we just simply hit the D key. We highlight the loop, select the loop with the mouse, and then hit the D key. And that copies it all the way through. Now I want to talk about the Presonus editor. Now this gives you a virtual instrument in Studio One Prime. And with this virtual instrument, you can put MIDI drums, you could put MIDI guitar, an orchestra, anything really. So you just go to the instrument tab and you see it under Presonus, under Presonus, and you see that they have set presets. So if I want to put something into the track, you just drag it in there and it creates a track and the interface opens up where you can adjust the parameters to change the sound. You could hit the keyboard there as to see how it sounds. Pretty easy. Everything is drag and drop in Studio One Prime. How do we put notes in there? Let's say you don't have a MIDI keyboard or a MIDI controller. Well, you could just paint the notes on just as you do with Vocaloid. So I'm going to take the mouse and I'm going to create one bar by just simply holding down the left button and dragging it to create a space. Now, we just select that and double click on it. It will open up that editor, which looks like a piano key and a grid, just like in Vocaloid. So we just make sure the pencil tool is selected. And we just draw notes. Now I'm just randomly picking out any of the white keys since that's the key of C and that's what the key of the song is. And you can hear what that sounds like. Which is pretty bad. But it just gives you an idea of what you can what it would sound like. And let's copy this all the way to the chorus part so we can get a full listen. So I'm just going to make sure I select that with my mouse and hit the D key. And let's give that a listen to. So that gives you an idea that you can just create a bar, create a guitar riff, and then copy that all the way through. And then you go to the next section, like the chorus, create another riff, and copy that. And you could change the instruments too. Like, for instance, I'm going to select a synth, and I'm going to drag and drop it right on the existing track. It does not change any of the notes. It just changes the instrument. And let's give that a listen to. I mean, how easy is that? Drag and drop right on top of the track. You could easily swap out an instrument. You don't have to go through menus or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that demo track there. Now we see the mixer interface, and we can see that we can expand the different tracks where we can have effects. You can see in the vocal tracks, I have the channel strip and a delay. And also on the main mix, I put in reverb. But let me turn off all of the effects so you can hear what the vocals sound like bare, naked.
Why were you born when the snow was falling? You should have come to the cuckoo's calling.
That's without any effects at all. So when we want to add effects, it's a drag and drop thing again. And if you double click on this, you'll see the effects interface. You can see I added some compression and I tweaked the EQ a bit. So let's put that back in, the effects and the delay, and give that a listen.
Why were you born when the snow was falling? You should have come to the cuckoo's calling.
Let's add the reverb back in.
Why were you born when the snow was falling? You should have come to the cuckoo's calling.
A little effects goes a long way. So within the mix itself,
Why were you born when the snow was falling? You should have come to the cuckoo's calling.
and you can see that we have 9 basic effects. Things like delay, reverb, compression, EQ. The compression EQ is in the channel strip. You also have an amp effect, which if you you can add change the sound of like guitars or something like that. Most likely, you won't need any fancy effects when you're just starting out. You just play around with the effects they give you and make the most of those to start out with. So that's basically it. It's pretty simple and easy. With 2 pieces of software, the Vocaloid Editor, the Tiny Vocaloid Editor, and the Studio One Prime multi-track recording software, you can construct a complete song. You've got loops, and you've got a virtual instrument, and you've got basic effects. So, I hope this helps. I'm not an expert on Studio Prime. Studio One Prime. I just downloaded it about a week ago. But if you have any questions, just go ahead and leave a comment, and I'll try to answer it as best I can. So go out and, create some music, and see you next time.